following program on Ada Derana 24 is classified as PG. It is intended for younger children in the company of an adult. It may contain some suggestive dialogue, infrequent coarse language, some sexual situations, or some moderate violence. Viewer discretion is advised. The following program contains opinions of the participants and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. The network believes in a safe space for all ideas to be expressed without any censorship and on its duty to create such a platform for free speech. Viewer discretion is strictly advised.
Hello and welcome to TPS, a program that we have carefully curated to give you answers of the questions that matter to you the most. Now here in TPS, we talk about current affairs, we talk about the well-being of our country, and the current topic that a lot of you are interested is with regards to the budget. Now we did also have two politicians come in last week to speak on the budget. We focused on social welfare and the IMF program. Today we aim to go a bit more in depth into the budget and get the opinions of the two wonderful gentlemen that will be joining today. Now, on to my right, we have Heshan Wijerathna, Head of Travel and Tourism for the Young Professionals Organization of SJB. Hello and welcome to the show, Heshan. And of course, we have a person who has been with us in TPS some time ago. Please welcome Senior Attorney at Law, Sudath Jayasundara, also representing SJB. Welcome to the show, sir. Now, gentlemen, today's, ideally, TPS is supposed to be a debate program, but we'd rather have a discussion today. Since both of you represent the opposition, we wanted to know your respective opinions on this year's budget. Let's start with you, Heshan. How do you find this year's budget?
Firstly, delighted to be here, and thank you for whoever put us together. And getting into the budget, firstly, I would like to state that the citizens of the country, or the people in the country, has given a mandate to the new president and the government. And this is having a lot of expectation, especially the middle level income earners. And they're having hope, thinking and believing that the promises that is made on the election platforms will be delivered. And getting into the budget, I'm pleased to note that the current budget is a forward-looking budget, and they have considered corruption and wastage to a level. But to put Sri Lanka on a growth projection, it is mandatory and it is necessary to maintain a GDP growth of 5% to 8% for the minimum, at least for next 10 years. And before I get into the numbers in the budget, I should mention that IMF is the best to streamline a country like ours, a developing country like Sri Lanka. And especially for an example, they'll have to get adjusted to the fiscal discipline. Whether you like it or not, you will have to get adjusted with the IMF rules and regulations. Anyway, getting into the numbers, primary balance is projected to achieve a surplus of 2.3% of GDP. As we talk about the key fiscal targets in the budget, as I mentioned before, the primary surplus of 2.3% GDP, which is very important for fiscal consolidation. And also the revenue, it is noted and recorded that 15.1% of GDP, whereas they are going to generate revenue through tax. Tax revenue is 13.9% of GDP, and non-tax revenue 1.1%, and the grants 0.09% of GDP. And when we are looking into the expenditures, 21.8% of GDP. And with a recurrent expenditure 17.8 and non-interest 8.9, interest 8.9, and public investment 4% of GDP. So anyway, with an overall budget deficit of 6.7% of GDP, while the primary surplus is aligning with the IMF's targets, the overall budget deficit at 6.7% is slightly exceeding the IMF's preferred, which is 5.2%. And the main concern of people is, what is this budget? By the looks of it, it is beautifully structured, and as beautifully structured as per the guidelines of the IMF, and also the projected revenue factors compared to last time it was 4,091 billion, and this time it is 4,990 billion, and it has gone up by 900 billion. And as per the budget proposal, 350 billion is generated through VAT, value added tax, and that is a very efficient and effective way of generating income towards the government. And also 900 minus the 350 billion, you have a balance of 550 billion. And to be honest, from my end, there's no clarity how it is being generated or how it is going to come. So surprisingly, there might be a second budget, and if not in the next budget next year, the government will have to tighten the financial instruments.
You mean to say either there should be an amendment or the next budget will suffer?
Yes. And also I should mention that lot of good proposals to be seen in this budget. For an example, digitalization and FDIs, public-private partnership, and in order to bring foreign investments, golden paradise residence visa is also announced. So everything is nice and clear, but all these are proposals. So in previous governments, administrations also came up with all these, but nobody had the strength to push it forward and activate it. So no point bringing all these proposals if we don't have the gut or the backbone to implement, execute and manage it. Otherwise it will be a failed product. And other than that, rest is all in order to gain the economic growth to this country, the government institutions should be restructured. So that is a different chapter which we are looking to talk about.
Definitely. We'll move on to that. Now, Heshan, as you mentioned, it's a budget filled with a lot of proposals.
Yes.
But then it begs to question whether this is just fondant that is trying to cover up the sort of shortfalls of the budget that currently exists. Because like you said, either there has to be a budget amendment with whatever the costs that were available, or budget could probably suffer. Now, that also brings into the question, because recently there was a figure that was allocated for the president's foreign travel, which was exorbitantly lower than that of previous presidents. Is this true? Is this a bit more sugar-coated? Has this been, maybe coated in the wrong angles? We will not know, only time will tell, and more sources will. Now, from a young politician, let's move on to a person with, let's say, more experience when it comes to the budgeting game, who has sit through a couple of budgets. Mr. Sudath, do you also share the same sentiment as Heshan?
Yeah. First and foremost, let me thank you for inviting me. At that time, I was representing the UNP. Now, this time SJB. I was the organizer of Maharagama then for the UNP. Anyhow, I think Shan had given a total account of the budget. I think it's very clear. on what he said and how the government intends or proposes to get this money. First and foremost, there has to be investments. There has to be foreign direct investments coming in. And at the same time, our exports growth, they're anticipating around 18%. But as a lawyer for me, I will give it slightly, since he had given a picture of the exact, the totality of the budget itself. I'm really worried about the SME sector. Now this SME sector has about 51%. That is small, medium enterprises. There is, if you take from the GDP, their contribution comes into around 52%. Then employment-wise, I think it's about 45%, and the totality of the business-wise about 75%, right? So this contribution is vital. Now I personally have seen, when going into the, lot of people had been having hardships just after COVID, after the pandemic. Then because of this uncertainty in the country, at a particular time there was almost anarchy in the country. There was no rule of law at that time. And in that situation, people find it very difficult to survive, basically the SMEs. Now because they had taken loans from banks, right? And to generate an income. And with that only, that even the country was getting out of their, like whatever the proceeds, part of as taxes, and even otherwise, even for the banks. Banks also kept afloat because they were able to give them, lend them, make money, and the usual thing, and to pay the depositors out of the money that they earn. So now this has come to a bit of a halt. Now okay, the central bank says give them an opportunity. So to streamline, reschedule the loans, come back onto the business model, and to keep the businesses afloat. Now the previous government stopped Parate temporarily till last December. Now the moratorium had been extended till March. But I really don't see banks acting on it. Central bank says the guidelines are given, tells the private banks, okay, talk to your clients and tell them that we are not going to acquire your assets, because the bank, just because they asset a shop or a hotel or whatever, they are not in real estate. They are in the financial sector. So they have to primarily think what they could do. And they are always going back on this saying, okay, if somebody defaults, we have to pay the depositors, and therefore we have no other resort rather than going in for Parati, which they will decide, the board will decide, go and take on the property to themselves. And so invariably we have to go to court. But the choices are very less. We can delay the process, but most of the time the banks have all the documentation, everything in hand, and they will proceed and take over the lands of the other people. So those people are caught there. Banks can't dispose of the assets that they have taken, and it's in a bit of a confused state. Now what the central bank says is, okay, go ahead, give them the opportunity, reschedule, we'll give them a little bit of oxygen to the system and let them also survive. But I don't see that happening. Because when the COVID loans were there, then they gave, for the COVID assistance was given, but the interest component was added on to the COVID loans. And then and at enormous rates. If you take the basic average rate, lending rate is very high. Yeah. And it was very high at one time. Now they have brought it down, but the banks say for this year they can't project a certain figure. Then they say, okay, pay a lump sum right now, then thereafter we will reschedule. But are people able to provide that lump sum? Because I know certain companies which have been talking to me, small timers, that if they pay back the way the banks want, they don't have a capital to run the business. You require the capital. So they are saying, how can we do it? Because we can agree to these terms and get it rescheduled. Yeah. Banks want us to reschedule at this interest rate, this amount to be paid upfront, the balance to be rescheduled for a period of 10 years on a projected sort of forecast that you are given. But these people, what they say, they can't survive because they don't have the capital in order to do that. Now the banks, very few banks, or maybe one or two banks, others say, no, we can't. If you go before courts, the courts will say, what can we do? The judges will always say, our hands are tied, because this is something with the customers. Like, you have to pay back the interest rates. And therefore, if a default is there, they are justified in taking the necessary steps. But now central bank, when you talk to them, they say, we can't tell them, we can't say mandatory we can't tell them you must do it, right?
Yeah.
It's just a suggestion to them. We try and do something and give them this relief. So some banks send this sort of a piece of paper where you write down everything, then they call you for a consultation, then you talk about this, how best to solve it. But the issue stands there still. So as my good friend suggested, can we meet those targets now? Because of the SME factor. Then, okay, we have come up on the credit ranking, right?
Yeah.
Now I think it's CC. No? Earlier it was restricted default RD, now it is CCC plus credit ranking. We have come up a little bit, and we got the tranche also.
Yes.
Yesterday or day before, that was President informed and said that we got it. But the thing is, now we are going on a welfare budget. Basically, because they have to keep to what they said. People were anticipating that some relief for themselves. Now you get Aswasuma. So and then you get the salary hike for private sector. I think you'll also get it, no? So anyhow, and then for the public servants, right? But that had been staggered, saying first 30% to be paid by 1st April, then thereafter they say next year, 26, 27. So that's why this budget, how can you do it? Now the deficit is there, as my friend suggested. Deficit was something which they say 6.7 and then the IMF says 5.2, right? And with this, now how are we going to settle this, what we have promised this, the government servants, 21,000 to 24,000 to 250 to 40,000 there. Private sector 21,000 to 27,000. Can the private sector generate this amount? They are saying they are going to give a plantation work also 1,700. So can you take on this burden? Do we have business to do it? So that's why the practicality of it. Then they say we get back to digitalization and technology, right? Now still there is another factor. Without a war, they are curtailing the security of the politicians. But then again, I saw 437 billion had been allocated
for military purposes.
For military purposes. So this 437, I believe it should be 437 million. It should be, I guess, because now here we have to take. There is an interest component that the government has to pay on the total earnings. 2.9 trillion, right, is the interest amount that you have to pay. Then as a capital to generate, to put in to businesses, 1.3 trillion. Then 800 billion is left for welfare work. 800 billion for welfare work, right? Out of that 800 billion, you are supposed to look after the health sector, the agricultural sector, the forces and everything. So can we do it? Will there be excess run on it? So that is going to be the problem that we are going to face. So how can they bridge this? This 800 billion comes to the wages. There is one. Then the Aswasuma. Then we are giving for the elderly another, how much is that? There is another percentage given to the elderly. Then for scholarships, 6,000. That had been gone up 1,000 rupees more, no?
Yes.
And then similarly there are, it's a sort of welfare, they are planning, intending to provide all these welfare measures to the people. But the problem is, as we were discussing, is this going to be enough, whatever our earnings? Because direct flow of indirect, foreign direct investments have still not yet to materialize. I think my friend will be able to go into it more, because we were just having a discussion about it, his experiences.
Yes.
Because what happens is, as the flow comes in, that if there was, we could have done a lot. But what has happened to our security? Security has failed. In the past so many months, with so many killings, everything, that security has failed. So there is no confidence among the investors. Then when something happens, the change of policies. So now these people at the current regime was talking about so many changes. IMF, we are going to renegotiate, we are going to do this, we are going to give so much of it. Now it had come to where it started, where it was before. And so we can see a failure on their part. Now, were they ready to take on the government, or were they just saying that, not in a real belief in themselves, but they were saying, okay, when we come into power, we'll do this. Did they actually believe that they could get power? Now, since that they have got power into their hands, how are they going to disperse it financially? How are you going to run the country? Because there are so many things that we have been telling. Okay, digitalization, technology, they say, there are people who are not the needy, but there are people who are making money who have also been brought into this. So digitalization is going to be something which will eradicate that type of thing. Similarly, technology. Now we are talking about e-commerce. Then we are talking about globalization. We have to be in that trend. So there has to be the export sector growth. Then at the same time, we are now actually playing to a gallery by talking about monkeys and crows and cats and dogs and things like that, right? When it comes to rice, it will say the dogs are eating too much or cats are eating too much. Or if something happens, the monkey has jumped onto it and taken off and pulled out a plug, right? Next day they will say something else, right? So because they can't now hold anyone. Now the human beings are left aside. We have basically been left alone, and it's the animals who are getting hammered. Now earlier they used to put it on someone else. No? Yeah. Now there is no other that they could blame. So now they are putting it on the animals, right? So thing is, now the whole thing, what I personally perceive is, it's a budget, well structured, but can it be implemented? Is it practical? With this 800 billion, I want to just check the figure on this military thing, I'll just check. Because I know definitely that it is 437, right? So why is this? Why are these allocations done, and with what purpose? And now Adani Group moving out, because what they say is we had about 14 rounds of talks, and then again there was a court case, that is something else, but they are asking us to renegotiate. And why? We have already put in about $5 million for the start itself. Now there is about 475 megawatts, no?
Yes.
And on wind power, right? Now we are talking about foreign direct investments. Now this is the investment that had come to Sri Lanka. We can't hold on to that. So what is this purpose really? Like, who is looking into these areas? Who is talking on the SMEs? They are saying SMEs, I started off by talking about the SMEs. SMEs are struggling up to now. They can't do anything, right? Then on the other side, we are talking about the banks. Banks are making enough money, but banks are not willing to listen to the central bank. They are saying, okay, we will give it restructured, but we have to do this, right? And on the other hand, we are talking about eradicating, the corruption.
Yes.
And the usual slogans that they talk, so about corruption. But corruption we are seeing, and in parliament people are talking about this one taking, that one taking. But at the bureaucracy level, at the bureaucratic level, or else at the time of dispersing certain things, has it been sort of totally taken out, eradicated? Because we don't see that happening.
I think we need to dive a bit more deeper into these topics.
Yes,
now we went for SMEs, we spoke about the industrial side of things, about travel and tourism, corruption, and the overall impact the budget is trying to have. Now if we take the point of the SMEs, under their fiscal proposal for 2025, the government aims to promote youth entrepreneurship, specifically in agro-based SMEs. Those will be supported. And when it comes to your digital economy, youth-based entrepreneurship, new innovative ideas are to be fostered by the budget, by the government. But the question here is it feasible? Can the country really afford this, given the allocations that have been proven in the budget? Now, answers to these questions we'll have right after this short break. We'll be back shortly. This is TPS. Welcome back to TPS. Now, before the break, we had a quick overview on how the two of our gentlemen perceives the budget for 2025. Now, we go in depth onto specific areas, key areas that each of them are experts in. Now, if you were to start off with Heshan, you already have had experiences in terms of travel and tourism, economic growth, and how it impacts the Sri Lankan economy. If we are to dive into that now, specifically if we take the tourism industry, the government has allocated 500 million for the year 2025. Along with that, they have also predicted a 5% economic growth rate for our country. Do you think it's feasible, or do you think it's something that could be achieved in a very long run and there has to be amendments made?
Let me answer you this way. Let me pitch back to the history a bit. That is when Singapore gained independence and became a member of UN, if I'm not mistaken, in 1965, it was none other than the Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew who projected Sri Lanka's development model to be established in Singapore. So I feel now it's time for Sri Lanka to reverse that and implement a development model as Singapore or Dubai. Right, and when we get into the tourism sector, before that, one thing to be addressed, and that is throughout our country is blessed with so many varieties of natural resources, and all throughout these years we are surviving, and still we are blessed to stay at this stage. And all these times the governments grew bigger and the private sector grew smaller, but it should be reversed now, that the private sector should grow larger and the government sector should grow smaller. So with that, the tourism industry, it has a vast potential, to be honest. So our Sri Lankan tourism is far below the global level. They are aiming, they are in numbers, they are aiming 2.5 million, if I'm not mistaken, 2.5 to 3 million tourists for the coming year. But all these people, tourists who are coming into the country, majority are backpackers. What's the point of bringing backpackers into the country? That is no problem. You can bring, there are different sectors in tourism, backpackers, luxury tourism, then you can promote medical tourism, and so on. So getting into the topic tourism, when I went to Maldives, all those hotels are getting marketed at a rate of about $1,000. Some are even going at $5,000 a night, $20,000 and $50,000 a night. Whereas Sri Lanka is selling our 5-star hotels per night at $100, maximum $200. What's the reason for this? So that's a big question mark. So main reason I feel that is lack of product development in the country for tourism. And we have a very cultural product. And when it comes to Maldives, one of our neighbors, Maldives is having all these beach resorts and floating restaurants, floating hotels, floating rooms, everything. So why can't Sri Lanka go to that extent? But 500 million is not enough, and they have mentioned with that 500 million they are going to develop the infrastructure and to create a destination for Anuradhapura and Yapao, if I'm not mistaken. So you can do better than that, and you can bring seaplanes into the country, because we are surrounded with the sea, and you have a gemology here. So you can promote gems, and in Thailand there's a huge tower full of gems, and we are not making use of our natural resources to promote gems to the tourists. And that is another way of gaining income to the country. But nobody has identified the potential of this sector, because we are still at a national level mindset. We are not competing with the international level. So, and to tell you more, how Maldives was able to sell at $5,000 a night, because all the high net worth people come in their private jets and get in to the country, they land into the country, and they need privacy. And to buy that privacy, they pay huge amount of money on top of that. And even in Sri Lanka, you can implement that. We have abundant runways, so we can make them come park their private jets, but we have to do renovations first and create a product, very different product, where there's no paparazzi, anything. Let them enjoy and go back to their country. So this way you can generate a lot of money. And also this will create more, when we diversify tourism industry, you will have enough job opportunities. You don't have to create, I heard that in the budget they say 30,000 new job opportunities will be given. So you don't have to give it in the government sector itself.
You can give it business.
Yeah, you have to diversify the whole industry, from tourism to education, everything. So we have to find out where the mistake is, which will be discussed in a while.
Now, speaking of this tourism industry and such, there were reports where, forget foreigners being treated right in Sri Lanka. There were reports that locals were mistreated in different areas of the south. Now, these issues should also be, let's say, thought of, should be actioned against. Now, like you said, Heshan, now 500 million that also has been allocated for sort of areas where they are historic destinations of Sri Lanka. Now, if we are to implement your model of having tourists fly in, have their privacy, and then maybe target the A-listers, the creme de la creme of the, let's say, Hollywood industry sometimes, can we really implement that? Do you think it's along with the government's push, do you think the entrepreneurship also has to foster at the same time?
Yes. But as you said, whether we'll be able to implement the Indian tourists here, the high net worth people, they don't come usually here. Because one thing we have to understand, our national political applications are always crashing with the geopolitical applications. That is where the question mark is. So even the port city, it could be a money generating machine, to be honest. But we are in a geopolitical issue, if I'm not wrong.
Do you share the same sentiment, Mr. Sudath? Now, you mentioned on how the SME sector was to be taken care of. It has been mentioned in the budget a couple of times. Can it really be achieved? Now, Heshan mentioned, we have tourism, we have 500 million allocated for it. Is that enough to really develop the country? And with
no, that's why I was just checking as to whether I had been a mistake when I first said about 437 million. In fact, it is 442 billion.
Billion, yes, that's a 12%.
Yeah, that is,
I think about 3% increase from last year.
3% increase from last year. So, whereas for the tourism sector, which is they call the low-hanging fruit, has been given only 500 million. So, with the military, what are they going to do? Now, they say they are going to dismantle all these main places in Jaffna and other places, military installations. And now, they are allocating a further sum. With what in mind, I can't understand. So whereas it should have gone into something more lucrative, more sort of profit yielding, something like tourism sector. And then give them that total cover. You were talking about, in fact, a point you touched on about the safety of the tourist also in the country. And once upon a time, we can remember there was a man who was jailed, and he was celebrating saying he had raped so many women. Right? So that type of image got tarnished during that time. Then there was proposals to counter those. And we came out of it somewhat, and now it is sailing well. But in the sphere of this airliners, there is an area which they say that domestic airlines can do much more, like seaplanes. but we are not being permitted. Licenses are not being given. It's been restricted. And a person who knows about the industry is not running the industry. Like basically, if you take airport aviation chairman, has he been a person who had been involved in the tourist sector, or has he been a pilot, or what? No. It may be a professor who had been brought in and put in there. So he's learning as to how to clip the wings, or and generating funds has to be a man from that field.
Yes, because we don't have time for learning.
Yeah, because they are learning how to put a fixer wheel here, or if the wings are too long, how to trim it, or all these things they'll be talking, discussing. Because we are full of professors now. And most of these professors don't have the professorships also. That's another problem that we have to investigate. But the thing is, this is the situation, because this country, correctly or wrongly, now it had been given over to the scholars to run. But scholars are not the people, because they will lecture. I'm not demeaning them in any way. But what I'm saying is, there has to be a person who had been in the trade, who knows the trade, who can talk about it. Which will take that, whatever the business, to a great heights. But it is not happening in Sri Lanka. No, this domestic aviation, they were talking about, I can remember there were a few pilots who spoke to me as well, and they say that we can be hub for, doing the servicing of small aircrafts, and to giving them spare parts and fitting on the spare parts for their whatever. Now even for a vehicle we need change of spare parts and things like that when you run over a period of time. They said now India, from this Madras downwards, or if you take total India even, that you can provide, we can provide that service. But because our people don't have that understanding, we are not doing it, and the business is going to Singapore. And Sri Lanka is very much closer to India. So there are so many things which together we can work out, we can do certain things which is currently not happening. And the other thing, that's why I was telling that when you have something like this, like you have to have, now it's basically the executive, legislature, judiciary and the press. Press is very important. Yes. Now they try to, sometimes they try to say, no, press is talking too much or whatever, muzzle the press.
Yes.
And then on this side they will say, now legislature, if the executive says, okay, we will do it, but I don't think the legislature is, like, we can see, it is not overly sure, but we can see the things are not happening the way that they are coordinating it. Now, I heard there are certain institutions, finance institutions run by the government, they don't even have people to put into audit committee, nor to a board, because people don't want to come and work, because they are being influenced from third forces. Now, NPP itself consists of 21 parties altogether, but there is the 3% party which is JVP. Their influence runs into the other areas, and where the NPP is cornered, and there are scholars, or maybe at that time, there were a lot of professionals who got into NPP. They have spoken to me and they have said, can't do this. Because the thing is, no one is listening to us. And they are saying, don't take this, don't take that. Then they are saying, now for us, there are certain things. When you come in, to a TV station, there are mandatory requirements. Yeah. They say, no, don't touch that. This is too much, this is too much. You go by a bullock cart, or you go by this bicycle or whatever. And that type of thing. So you have seen how many resignations have happened up to now. Boards had not been filled. Certain audit committees, which is a requirement at the highest level of some of the banks, I don't want to mention that. National banks, they don't have the audit committees. So are they compliant with the central bank regulation?
Now, the budget, of course, is here to solve a lot of problems, ensure corruption doesn't happen. But things that are currently happening are quite contrary to what the government wants Sri Lanka to go through and the restructuring of Sri Lanka. Now, of course, gentlemen, I've gotten both of your views so far, but for the interest of time, we'll have to go for a short break, and we'll be back with both of your closing remarks with regards to the budget of 2025. We'll be back. This is TPS. Welcome back to TPS. As you joined in earlier for our previous two segments, the topic of discussion for today was budgets, and we touched specifically onto the SME sector, digital economy, and whether Sri Lanka can really achieve that 5% economic growth despite, well, according to some, the expenses not being allocated properly to the correct places. Now, to close things off, gentlemen, let's start off with you, Mr. Sudath. Your overall view, in a summarized manner, of the budget. Is it achievable? Is it enough?
Achievable or enough? Achievable, I think, long way to go. You have to know the psyche of the people also. Now we are talking about, yesterday I was at a meeting where there was a gentleman, a professor was talking about the new generation. Those who were born after 2000, right? Alpha, beta, it goes on, not like, those, their aspirations, what they want to do. Now we are talking about a budget on a very traditional grounding. Getting historical data, trying to put it, and trying to say all sort of various things about the farmers, and we were talking about all that. So are we going hand in hand with the new generation? If you go to a political party, I have seen this. If you take all the traditional political parties, there aren't people of your age coming, I will tell you, right? What is lacking? Now maybe with the NPP at that stage, we saw a lot of young people going. And some of these people are not JVP. They were the people with the UNP and HJB and people of that sort. What I'm saying is, at that breakaway time, SJB was like SJB, UNP in the sense we rightist parties, like, but had a thinking. Basically, SJB has a thinking of mid-left, like, not left-oriented. But the thing is, though it's a capitalist party, you are thinking on welfare as well of the normal person. And to engineer that and to take it forward, you have a very good team of people who are experts, right? But with this scenario, vis-a-vis with them compared to the present, we are putting a budget. We are saying we are going to pay back in 2028 the loans. We are talking about generating jobs. But are we fitting into the psyche or the emotions of this younger generation? Are we thinking of, those days say we are expectant of a pension. And we are going into, because of the pension, we want to get a government job. Till recently, everyone says good jobs are also kept aside because you are having some sort of safety network at the end of the day. So is that happening? So are these young people left in the lurch again? Right? So with this mechanism, is it going to work for the future as well? Right now, things you are talking about AI. You are talking about all sort of things now which has come into being. Now we can't dispense with it. So there will be a lot of jobs. People will start losing jobs also because of the other shorter methods of bringing these things. So, okay, to answer what you said, the budget, whether it's adequate, how did they perceive the whole structure? Is it on the numbers that they did just to please somebody saying break it for 3 years, we'll give you 5,000 or something of that sort in order to say, just to confuse the people a little bit, and or are they in a position to do this? Now I was just looking at it. Now say for example, after 17,500 for extremely poor, for the low income 10,000, for the elderly and disabled 5,000. So that's also another which has to go into. But they are saying now there are discrepancies. People were doing all sort of juggleries and getting money out from this. Now they are going to say they are devoid of political corruption, right? Then bribery, corruption. Now we see it happening in Parliament. Lists are being read out saying this, that, and the. But is it happening?
I think that is a topic for another day's discussion specifically.
It's a long drawn out topic.
It's a very long road, and then
so
I think
anyhow, budget. To put a stop to what you said, because I know my time is up. So thing is, I have a feeling they have not studied they have not structured it. It is just to please the people. They have put in something together, dished it out. With 800 million, if they can survive, if they are taking out the capital component away, if they are taking about the loan component away, with 800 million, can you survive? Out of which 500 is given to the tourism sector, 442 to the military, billion, that is. This is 800 million. Right?
Yes.
So, can they match it?
Can they really match it? Heshan, in short, what are your thoughts?
I'm standing on different grounds, to be honest. Not as the opposition, not as the government. Anything you can achieve, but you should have right people for it. Right people at the right time. So that is one thing, and other than that, I badly wanted to mention this. The government institution should be restructured. Restructuring as in, the efficiency is not there. Effectiveness is not there, but still they go on increasing the salaries of it. But you can increase the salaries. So I'll come to that in a while. But in order to get the efficiency and effectiveness, you need to put some KPIs into government sector even. And other thing is, you should match the gap between the private sector and the government sector. For an example, in a scale of salary. So private sector, you pay well. And government sector, I saw recently in an article, they are not getting enough salary compared to the private sector. So every human is selfish. So in that case, they will go to the private sector, they will perform very well, and whatever the fruits have been harvested by the private sector. So only one side is booming. Then what will happen? There's a downfall on the public sector, government sector. So that also should align with that.
Maybe the inefficiencies are created there itself because people are not motivated to really perform as much when it comes to the public sector.
And in the other hand, something that I suggest, when you come to a board to make a decision, I prefer they should consider private sector 50% and the government sector 50%, and the minister can vote whatever that is right. So still they have the control of it there. So they should consider, then there won't be ups and downs. So, and the other thing is, whatever the government that come and go, we should have a common vision, common goal in order to bring this to a developed country.
Definitely. Now, of course, when it comes to the budget of 2025, a point that Heshan made, it has to be based or done for the betterment of everyone in Sri Lanka. No matter how much they earn, no matter what class or caste they come from, it has to benefit the entirety of Sri Lanka. And I believe us here at TPS and the two wonderful gentlemen that joined us on today's discussion would have made the budget seem a little bit more understandable for your respective viewpoints. So if you are a person from the tour or travel industry, maybe from an SME, maybe a person or maybe a student who's analyzing the budget, we sincerely hope your insights or their insights on today's discussion would have helped you. We'd like to sincerely thank Heshan Wijerathna. Thank you so much for joining us from the SJP, and specifically Head of Travel and Tourism for the Young Professionals Organization of SJP. So we had a fresh young perspective with regards to the budget. And of course, thank you so much to one of our recurring guests, Senior Attorney at Law, Sudath Jayasundara, also from the SJP, for giving your insights as a person who has sat through a multiple of budgets and really gave us the analysis onto how the budget compares for previous budgets. Now, ladies and gents, we will see you next week with another insightful debate or discussion. See you next week.
There's a couple pictures of you laughing, gripped tight to raffle tickets. I've got memories, but I'm slipping. You left some people in here wondering if you'll stay here or not. You wanna make some money, give a kid to dad when he has somebody. You're gonna feel the same in his big rig out in Texas. He'll have pictures in his wallet. There's a couple pictures of you laughing, gripped tight to raffle tickets. I've got